Welcome to Leaders Call. Thanks for listening and tuning into this episode. This is the first episode of what I hope to be a series on different aspects of leadership. I'm Jason Sharp. I'm the Command Sergeant Major of the 402nd Military Police Battalion. And my goal here is to reach out to the soldiers of the battalion. If you're not part of our battalion, I still hope that you get something out of this episode and these series. The first episode is me interviewing a good friend of mine, a first sergeant, somebody I met on my last deployment. He taught a class as part of the Joint Senior Enlisted Leadership Council, and he taught a class on servant leadership. He's got some great talking points, and I really hope that you can get something out of this conversation. Right. Well, Dan, it's great to see you again. For everybody, this is Dan Caddy, a good friend of mine. We met in Djibouti, Africa. He was a first sergeant of a combat engineer unit that was underneath the Joint Task Force. He was also the president of the Joint Senior Enlisted Council on Camp Lemonnier. He instructed a class on servant leadership, which is why I wanted him to be the very first interview. I really enjoyed that class. Dan and I had great conversations about leadership while we were over there. He's a member of Army National Guard. He's an author and an entrepreneur, and we'll talk about that after we talk about servant leadership. You know, Dan, I appreciate you coming on. You know, the purpose of this, as I kind of told you on the phone and before, it's really to connect with the leaders in the battalion. Our battalion's spread out across the state of Nebraska, literally from the most eastern city all the way to the western cities on the western side. And I remembered your class in Africa, and I thought, what a better topic. So I appreciate you being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first off, I just want to talk about what kind of motivated you to get into the military?
There's a history of service in my family on my mom's, both my mom's and my dad's side. All Marine Corps on my mom's side. Interestingly enough, my dad was a squadron leader in the Royal Air Force during World War II. And it hadn't really crossed my mind, but I did well in school. I ended up graduating early and then made a series of poor decisions with my life and found myself in a place where I was like, I got to do something. I need some structure. I've got to do something positive because the way I'm going isn't working right. So I ended up enlisting in the Guard. I kind of weighed the options, and the Guard appealed to me because in addition to serving my country overseas when called, I'd be able to do something for my state, for my community, do something here in addition to that overseas role.
That's exactly, why I chose the Guard too. I really like that state connection. If the recruiter could have told me when I enlisted, hey, you can join the Army Reserves and be an MP, I probably would have done it because that wasn't my first MOS. But yeah, I've loved the Guard ever since. So were you always a combat engineer?
Well, I enlisted as a combat engineer, and the funny thing was, I get a call from my recruiter 3 weeks before I was supposed to ship saying, yeah, we kind of screwed something up, so you lost your spot. So you can either wait until next year, or we can send you as a fueler and then send you to reclass right when you get back. It's kind of like, well, I need to get on the first thing smoking out of here. So I took that option. And then I think within a month or two after getting back, I went to reclass and never worked in the fueler MOS. So I've been an engineer for 22 years.
Nice. Blown a lot of shit up from what we talked about. So.
Indeed, that was actually how my recruiter got me. Sitting there after taking the ASVAB, and we're talking about what I want to do. He's like, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. I'm 18 years old. I don't know anything about the Army. It's like, well, you could be a truck driver. You could do human intelligence. You could do this. You could do that. And then he thinks for a second. And he goes, well, let me ask you something, son. How would you like to drink heavily, break shit, and blow shit up? 18-year-old me was like, where do I sign? Here I am.
Let me sign right now. Here's my pen.
Yep.
Awesome. So, 20 years later, you're on a mobilization as a first sergeant going to Africa. Uh, what was kind of the background, before you got to that first sergeant role? Like, was it something you volunteered for? Was it just you were next in line? Was there a competitive process?
Yeah, so first sergeant promotions in the Guard are, as everybody pretty much knows, a lot more competitive than active duty because not only do you have to, in Vermont, you essentially have to do three boards. There's your board for the promotion list to just be promoted to master sergeant. Then there's a leadership board where they evaluate all the eligible people for that MOS and grade and pick, the top whatever percent. All right, these people are qualified for leadership positions. Then when a specific position opens up, you have to submit a separate packet and do an in-person board for that specific position. So you could be number one on the promotion list for promotion to master sergeant, but not get selected for a first sergeant position. I was a platoon sergeant in one of the engineer companies. Ended up with this last round of deployments, our battalion headquarters is supposed to be deploying. So I got command directed to our HHC as the battalion ops NCO to fill a E8 ops NCO position for the deployment, kind of a broadening assignment. Shortly after I got transferred over, the battalion lost their mission, and then there was no way for me to be promoted to E8. There were first sergeant vacancies for both of our line companies and a number of applicants. I boarded and was selected for our Bravo company first sergeant, and then I had a 2-day drill and a 2-week AT period right before we left for Mob Station to assume responsibility, kind of get everybody on the same page and get us out the door.
Did you have the opportunity to go through that company commander first sergeant course as an E7, or you just jump right in?
Just jump right in.
Wow.
I had attended the master leader course in October of 2020, which ended about a week before packets were due for the first sergeant promotions.
So you were good at writing papers by the time you got to Africa, from what I understand, since I didn't have to go to that course.
Pretty much, the papers was a big part of it, but it was more the change in the learning method compared to any previous PME I'd been to. I gotta say, the master leader course, I went to the resident course. It was fantastic. It was drinking from a fire hose, but it's definitely a lot of good information, and I'm glad they're taking that new tack with senior NCO education.
Yeah, no, you are right. I joke around about it a lot, but it is a lot different. I remember, because that transition happened, or at least at the Sergeant Major's Academy, between my phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was that death by PowerPoint, and you're just clicking, but you can't click because you have to wait till they're done talking. And it was, almost a year of that, and it was painful. I mean, it forced you to listen, but it was painful. And then that phase 2 was exactly what you were trying to say, or what you were saying, where it's a lot more, there's a lot more reading, there's a lot more thinking, applying, and then obviously the writing of the papers. But
well, and I think a lot of people, I see a lot of soldiers complaining, especially on social media, about, well, I went to BLC, ALC, SLC. Why am I writing papers? I was there to learn field skills. I'm like, well, no, you're actually there to learn how to think, not what to think, and how to absorb information and then create a coherent way to communicate that to others. So the APA format is actually really good for that, especially with the PI format, the present, inform, explain. I assert this. Here's some doctrinal information to support my claim. Here's why that doctrinal information supports what I asserted. So it allows you to concisely communicate information both up the chain and down the chain, and also communicate. But I'm sure you've seen it. How many times have you seen a counseling statement or an evaluation written by an NCO that looks like a fourth grader?
oh yeah, or it's just bullet comments with like 5 words per bullet comment. You have no idea what was talked about, no idea what was discussed, and then 5 months down the road, you're supposed to use that as justification for, a negative bullet comment on an NCOER, hey, we need to do UCMJ action or justify an award on the positive side. And you look back at these counselings and there's nothing there. It was a poorly written, eval or a counseling statement.
I have legit seen an NCOER bullet comment that said, "Soldier did good," and good was not spelled correctly.
Was there a U or was he God?
There was a U.
Oh well. It is, leadership over the years, there is a lot of things that you can look back on and laugh at. But yeah, that is funny.
Well, related as when I first joined, I successfully hid the fact that I could type from the Guard for about 12 years. Because I would see all the E7s in there doing this on a laptop, trying to type an eval, and they'd look at Private me and go, "Hey, Private Caddy, do you know about computers?" And I'm like, "No," because I didn't want to be the guy in there writing all the stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like me and my bus driver's license. Nobody wanted to drive the bus across the state, but so yeah, you did bring up a valid point about the institutional army being designed to help you learn how to think and justify and articulate the reasons why you believe something. And I think that's what a lot of people have forgotten about over the years is the operational army is designed to train you in your MOS, your tactical skills, your field craft skills. That institutional army is, yes, there is doctrine, but it is more of what the army is really trying to go to now is think how to think and how to analyze and how to apply. And then obviously the self-development domain is you're doing what you're doing to for yourself. But I'm glad that you brought that up. I think that's a valid key point. I remember talking to you about that at the mess as well. So let's just jump into the servant leadership class. So looking back on your career, your years in the Guard, and obviously leadership is more than just the military and the civilian sector as well. What are some pivotal moments in your career which kind of helped you develop your current leadership style? Maybe not specifically servant leadership, but just your current leadership style.
Well, I think it started when I first got in the Guard. Like I said, I had what you would consider a checkered background. I really needed some help. And when I first got to my unit, I was not a good soldier. I was what you would call a shitbag that a lot of leaders across the force right now would just write off because I couldn't separate the person from the behavior. And that's another point we'll come back to. But I had some leaders that didn't quit on me. Instead of writing me off, they gave me tough love. They showed me compassion. They showed empathy. They listened and helped kind of guide me along the way. So that formed the basis of it. Like why I wanted to advance in rank was not, oh, hey, look at me. I'm a sergeant, a staff sergeant, sergeant first class, first sergeant. It was, I got something that saved my life and I want to pay that forward. As a team leader, I can do that for 3 soldiers. As a squad leader, I can do that for 8 to 10 and mentor 2 team leaders in that image, and so on up the chain. And of course, nothing goes according to plan. One of the pivotal transitions is when you transition from 4 to 5. You go from being a member of the mafia to the next day, especially in the Guard as active duty. You get promoted to E5. You're out of your company. You're in a whole nother unit. In the Guard, Saturday morning, you're specialist caddy. After first formation, all of a sudden you're in charge. You're like, oh.
Yeah.
So you do what you think you're supposed to do, and you make a lot of mistakes. So I think my leadership style has been reflected in that early ground in before I even knew what servant leadership was, being shown it, and being shown that empathy and compassion and just feeling like somebody cared about me. And trying to emulate around that. And obviously it's evolved over time. But I think the evolution of my leadership style has been mainly grounded in my own failings, coupled with that self-awareness and emotional intelligence to realize when I'm failing and try and figure out what the next right thing is.
Yeah. So do you think it was just some individual leaders that really had that leadership style, or was that the actual climate of the battalion?
Well, so I joined pre 9/11 in 2001. My first experience with the Guard, when I showed up to my unit, there was a gentleman, E4, at 7 in the morning, leaning against his car with a can of Busch Light in his hand, spray painting his boots black. So we were not what you would call a crack organization at that point.
The boots were black at least. Was it glossy or flat?
Met the standard. It was a flat black. So it was more of a laid back attitude since then. One of the things I observed once the deployment started is leaders in the Guard kind of shifted the other way, thinking, oh, we're going on deployment. We got to do what active duty does. So they'd go way over the top, thinking they were doing what active duty does, but not really. So I don't know. I think the culture at that point was more laid back. But it was still very much grounded in the traditional authoritative style of leadership. You will do what I say because I am this rank, and that's the end of it. So I think there truly were some great leaders in there that showed that style, because I experienced all the different styles throughout my career, especially in the early days. But that was what really stuck out to me.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to try and talk about, if we remember, now is probably not the right time, and if we look at the outline that we're following, but is yes, we want to try and institute the elements of servant leadership and that positive leadership environment we want to create. But now, as a first sergeant or a master sergeant or just a senior leader, in that organizational leadership level, how do you build that team when you don't see your team all the time? And if I don't remember to bring it up, hopefully you'll remember to bring it up, because I think it's important, because I really saw a shift in my career from when I went from an E7, training, interacting, helping other people, develop training, working, hand in hand with the platoon all the time, to now I'm a first sergeant, and now most of my drills doing admin stuff, making sure things are running smoothly, interacting. I had a lot less interaction, especially with the younger soldiers, and then even more so now as a command sergeant major. Like I told you before on the phone, I got one company that's spread out on the other side of the state, 8-9 hours away, and thanks to our aviation battalion, it makes it a lot easy to get out there. It's a 2.5, 3 hour flight instead of a 9 hour drive. But I'd like to get back to that, if you don't mind, later on. So we talked about the verbiage of senior or servant leadership. So what is it? How would you define it?
Servant leadership is essentially putting the needs of your subordinates above your own. In the traditional leadership model, which the Army tends to follow, it's top down. The leader has the positional power, and they rely on that. Servant leadership relies on influence, on building relationships, on getting to know your people, investing in them, and really that bottom up, where the leader does not exist for all of those down here to work for them. The leader works for all these people because they're the ones that actually accomplish the work of the organization. If you remember from the class, one of the videos I used was that scene from We Were Soldiers Once in Young, as they were getting ready to ship out, and there's the one PL that's behind his guys and screaming, hey, get up the hill. And there's the other that go up ahead and then watch and check on each of them. They both made it to the hill at the same time. But the second leader, when he got to the top, sat down, took off his boots, had everybody take off their boots, and had everybody check one another's as he checked another soldier's feet. So it's simple things like that. Instead of, you will do this, hey, watch what I do. And showing that genuine and care and concern for your subordinates.
Yeah, I remember that scene. It's a great scene. It really emphasizes that, care for your soldiers. People talk about, what is the mission of the men? And, it truly is. It's the men, or the men and the women, but you got to take care of them. Otherwise you can't accomplish the mission. So that's what I really like about this. I loved how you ended the class. So when you ended the class at the last slide, or second to last slide, the bottom line up front, it said, and I'll read it: if serving is below you, leadership is beyond you. And it's exactly what it is, because as a leader, you have that responsibility to take care of your people. Is that something that you came up with, or did you find it somewhere? Or I'm just curious. Not that it
No,
truly matters.
it's a saying that's been around a bunch. So a couple of things that stuck with me. That one really hit home. The other one that I think, going back to how when I became a E5, I was terrible. So I was doing what I thought sergeants were supposed to do. And it's that saying, you can't raise your soldiers the way your NCOs raised you, because your NCOs raised you for an army that no longer exists. It's like, not saying that, like I was raised by good NCOs, in that initial thing, but times have changed. And if you as a leader don't change with them, you're not going to be able to have that effective connection with your people.
True. And it really is. And I know you're going to touch on it later, but those emotional intelligence skills of social awareness, so the social skills, social interaction, understanding how you come off is just extremely important. And I think that's what that really highlights what you were saying.
Well, and some of
When
the
did
other
you really
tenets of
truly get? Oh, go ahead.
some of the other tenets in leadership is, instead of commanding and demanding respect, you're earning respect quietly through the way you treat your people. Instead of maintaining power, you're sharing power. Instead of acting as the arbiter of information, you're putting all the information out. Instead of dictating, here's what we're going to do, giving people the intent and the task. Hey, here's what we got to accomplish. How do you think we should go about this? And taking input from the team. So you're giving your team personal ownership of accomplishing that task. And it unlocks so much creativity, so much potential. Taking that method, instead of having an organization of 100 people that are just doing what they're told, you have an organization where one person has the intent and 99 people are taking that intent because they understand it and working to contribute to making it happen, bringing all their skills to bear, and you're getting 150% of their effort. So I consider myself a pretty smart person, but I'm not smarter than the collective intelligence of 99 other people if I adequately communicate what we need to accomplish and inspire them as to the why we need to accomplish it.
Yeah, exactly. So as going from E4 to E5, we see this a lot, not all the time, but a lot of where they revert back to that direct leadership style in every single situation. There is a time and place to be direct. And I tell people frequently, you can be direct without being rude or degrading, but for the vast majority of the time, that participative and that delegatory leadership response, leadership style, is important, and it has that place. And just as you were describing, how do you really pull that out, or how have you pulled that out of your leaders, your subordinate leaders, in your platoons, your companies?
Well, it all starts from the top. If I tell leaders, hey, you will lead in this way, and then I don't do it myself, they're going to go off what I do, not what I say. But it actually used to be in our doctrine. So the Army leadership spectrum, what was it? It used to be 22-100 before it became 6-22.
That's correct. Yep.
There was the Army leadership continuum. So you have compliance on one end and you have commitment on the other. So your leadership style can vary in between that. You want to go more towards compliance, or excuse me, commitment. You want people to do what you need them to because they're committed to the organization and the environment you've built. If you're only relying on compliance, you will do what I say, otherwise you're going to get Article 15. They'll do it, but they'll do the absolute bare minimum. You know, obviously compliance or commitment is the goal, but you can't use that in every situation. If we're taking fire, I'm not going to kneel down to you as you're in the prone in the middle of the road and say, hey, so what we got going on right now is we're taking fire from an automatic weapon over there. And I'm pretty sure we're going to start taking mortars pretty soon. So if you could, you know, get up and move to a position that you see fit that provides adequate cover and, you know, put that saw into operation, that'd be great. No, yeah. I'm going to use compliance. Get off the ground, move to cover now, return fire, because that's warranted in that situation.
Yeah.
Now, is the same level of leadership style warranted for, hey, we got to organize the motor pool? Probably not.
Yeah. Exactly. I use the story a lot about, you know, I give a, you know, or in like example of in a combat role, like you were saying. And then on the flip side, like when I was an intelligence analyst in charge of, you know, multiple teams of analysts, like if I go in there and I start yelling at people, they're not going to think, and I need them to think. And yeah, so I always use that, but it's the same exact thing that you gave. It just reminded me of that when you said that. So moving on. So obviously servant leadership isn't new. You know, there's a lot of information out there, but when did you start to conceptualize this? And then more specifically, when did you decide that this is what I want to teach, you know, in CODP, in leadership classes, and reinforce both setting the example and then, you know, formally at, you know, as an instructor?
Well, so I think, you know, servant leadership isn't anything new. The modern servant leadership was coined by Mr. Greenfield, I think back in the 70s, is included in that presentation. But if you really go back to it, Sun Tzu hit on servant leadership in his quote, regard your soldiers as your children, and they will follow you into the deepest valleys. Look upon them as your own beloved sons, and they will stand by you even unto death. So to me, that's kind of the origins of it. He hit on it. Like you can be the leader that treats people as subordinates because you have positional power over them and they have to do what you say, or you can be the leader that looks after them like they're your own kids and they will love you for it. So like going back to the experience I had when I first got in, I always wanted to emulate that. And you know, you learn something from every leader you have, whether good or bad. I tend to think you learn more from the bad leaders than you do from the good ones, because you learn a lot of, oh God, I never want to do that. So that was always my goal. And then life happens. So looking back on it, we always have our goals, and then we oftentimes fall short of them. So reflecting back on my time as a platoon sergeant, after I was selected for first sergeant, it was kind of, and you know, jumping ahead into that self-awareness and that emotional intelligence, it really came about as a result of examining my own failures as a leader, between what I set out to do and then what I actually did. I wasn't the greatest. I I oftentimes chose myself over soldiers. I damaged relationships without even thinking about it. I always had the greatest intent, but the execution wasn't always there. So I think really the focus on servant leadership, leaving that platoon sergeant role and reflecting back on it, was taking a full inventory of the leader I wanted to be, and then an honest reflection of the leader I actually was, and not being happy with what I saw in the mirror. And then going to the master leader course, they've renewed their focus on leadership. On servant leadership, there's a whole module on it, and it kind of clicked that light bulb for me of, here's where I lost touch with what I was trying to do. So kind of that renewal and coming out of the master leader course, and then now changing company, having the opportunity to take over a new company with kind of a fresh start. It was the opportunity to take the sum of everything I've learned, the sum of all the failures that I'd self-reflected on, and really come up with a strategy of, I have 17 days to enter this organization and get us all on the same page for a deployment. How am I going to do that? And how do I want to build this team? And servant leadership was the answer.
How much time from when you graduated master leader course to when you took over as first sergeant?
45 days.
Okay, so it was a relatively short flash to bang.
Yeah, it was kind of that perfect opportunity of, if I had the opportunity to do this, start from scratch, I can come into here, set the tone. And that's like, people ask them, what's the best job you've had in the Army? And hands down, it's first sergeant. It's the first time in your career where you set the tone for an entire organization. I'm no longer a platoon sergeant doing one thing one way. The other platoon sergeant's doing things a different way. I'm fighting with the first sergeant because he has different ideas. It's, no, here's what we're doing. So I kind of had this idea of, instead of being the intense, angry, aloof first sergeant, what if I took this approach where instead of being in my office all the time doing paperwork, I was out at the smoke pit with the E4s asking them about how their family's doing, and establish being approachable, right? I didn't want soldiers to think that I was just there. I wanted them to feel that they could come and talk to me. They could share their lives problems. Colin Powell had a great quote about leadership is solving problems. The day your soldiers stop coming to you with their problems means they've either lost confidence in your ability to help them solve them, or they've concluded you don't care, either as a failure of leadership. So I wanted to establish that environment of like, here's my vision for what we're going to do. Here's how I think we can get there. And I want to hear from you how we can get there together.
Feel that worked?
Yeah, I feel it did. One of my E4 is probably 2 months into the deployment. We were talking, he's like, when you first showed up, you were intense. I was like, I'm never going to talk to this guy. But then I started watching you and watched how you talk to people and saw how you talk to me and realized they actually cared about me. So that was like one of the good indications of, hey, this is working. And the point, a number of my soldiers, they knew I was dealing with some personal stuff on the deployment because I shared it with them. And they would come up to me and say, hey, First Sergeant, how are you doing? You're always so busy checking in on us. I feel like nobody ever checks in and asks how you're doing. And that was the indicator of, like, that was the environment I was trying to build. where we were all looking out for one another, and no one was above being checked on. So I
Yeah,
say that
that's
you share that care and concern for your soldiers, and they share it back to you.
yeah, that's amazing. An E4 checking on an E8. Um, that definitely proves that you instilled that leadership style. Uh, I remember I remember that talking to you one time at the mess, and you were sharing about your soldiers downrange, down in southern Somalia, Kenya, and how this leadership style really kept them motivated in really crappy situations. I don't know. Do you remember you talking about that, or do you remember?
Yep.
Yeah, it was pretty, pretty interesting. And you were talking about how your soldiers even mentioned, or they were, I think, if I remember right, they were paired up in the tower with some infantry soldiers from the other companies in the task force, and they were positive, they were motivated, and the infantry soldiers were like, what's the deal? What, why aren't you?
Well, no, it was actually the infantry sergeant major down there.
That's right. Yeah.
He's like, when they hit ground, there was a lot of consternation. Soldiers weren't happy. Their morale was low. And no matter the situation, the sergeant major would walk past my engineers, and they'd be getting ready to go on another 12-hour shift after, having 10 hours off. And they got music going. They're laughing, joking, dancing, shooting the breeze, and they're in a good mood. And the sergeant major asked one of my squad leaders, like, every time I see you engineers, you're always happy. You've always got a good attitude. You're not bitching. What's your secret? And the squad leader looked at him and said, well, servant leadership. It's what our first sergeant taught us, and that's what we do in breacher company. So that was another indication, like, I'm nowhere near Kenya. But that mentality, and it goes back to kind of the core of that servant leadership, is giving soldiers the why. Hey, here is why we're doing what we're doing. So even if something sucks, the soldier understands why they're shoveling shit and how that shoveling the shit fits into the greater operational purpose, they can understand and make it their own. You just tell them to shovel shit because I said so, they're going to hate it.
I'm glad you brought that example up, because that leads perfectly into my next question. Was, you started that class off the same way I start all my NCODPs off, with the definition of Army leadership, which is influencing people by providing purpose, direction, motivation while operating to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. And we discussed that definition, and then you went directly into purpose. And why do you feel, and you've already kind of touched on it, but why do you feel purpose is so important?
So that people understand their role and what they're doing. So one of the gripes I heard is, so I took a trip down to Kenya to visit my soldiers, and I was going around through the towers and spending time with them, and yeah, I just want to be doing our mission. It's like, well, you are. Well, no, our engineer mission. Yeah, you're doing your engineer mission right now. Well, no, I'm sitting in a tower staring at nothing. So then I would just give them the purpose. Okay, so engineers doctrinally are the only MOS that has a secondary mission to what? Fight as infantry. Okay, so what's the infantry doing right now? Tower security. Okay, so are you doing your infantry mission? Well, yeah. All right. So when we're doing our engineer mission with the shovel, we're clearing the way. We start getting shot at. We drop the shovel, we pick up the rifle. We do our infantry mission. Right now, you got the rifle, you're doing the infantry mission until it's time to do the engineer mission. And then I was able to tie it into kind of the greater thing. I'm like, Okay, so let's think about why you're in this tower right now. Why are we in Africa? You know, whenever, okay, strategic thing, what do our near peer adversaries have all around us that we don't have? Well, let me back up. So, what are the two ways to get military equipment and supplies onto a continent? All right. Well, by sea or by air? Okay. Do we have any ports in Africa? No. All right. What's right over there? An airfield? Yeah. So, what do airplanes need in order to land? Security. And what are you providing? Security. So I related how sitting in a tower pulling security went up levels all the way to the US national security strategy as published, which focused on Africa. So then the soldier understood their purpose. So now all of a sudden, this sucks. I'm sitting in a tower, and like, I understand why I'm sitting in a tower and how it fits into the overall national defense of this country. So that illustrates why that purpose is so important. So now instead of getting up in the morning going, I don't know why I'm sitting in this stupid effing tower, it's sitting in the tower isn't the greatest, but I understand how I fit into this overall structure. And it, providing that purpose is all a part of influence. Like the key word, if you remember from the class I highlighted, was influence. You'll see this again. Influencing is getting others to do what you need done because they want to do it. If you don't provide the purpose, you can't effectively influence.
And you're right, influence is extremely important. And I know I've been a guest speaker at a couple of different basic leader course graduations, and I always talk about, I break down the Army leadership definition, but I talk about influence. What kind of leader are you? Are you a positive influence or are you a negative influence? And that's a choice that an individual has to make. And if they don't feel like they have a purpose, even if it is just standing a tower, which is a funny story, which I will get to in a second, even if it is just standing in a tower, if they understand that purpose, then they understand they're part of that bigger piece. So yeah, it's important. So I'm glad you highlighted that. So anyways, talking about the tower, totally off topic. 2001, I'm an E5, the S2 intelligence section sergeant at Camp Able Sentry in Macedonia. And an insurgency, well, we were supporting Kosovo, the Kosovo mission, and insurgency started in Macedonia, and it got closer and closer and closer to our base. And then there were some riots outside the U.S. Embassy. So our infantry unit, that company that was assigned to man the towers, got sent to secure the embassy until the Marines showed up, which they were tasked with it, but obviously they weren't within. It took them maybe 24, 48 hours to show up. I forgot exactly what it was. So the rest of the headquarters had to pull guard duty, which included me. So me and another guy were in the tower, and we see this Connex, which was turned into an office, and I don't know why, I don't remember where this bowl of fruit came from, but we had plums, apples, and we're like, huh, I wonder if we can throw this shit and hit the door. And so we're in the guard tower, threw the apple, hit the door. They come out. Obviously, we're like however many, meters, yards away. They're looking around. Nobody. We did it one more time. It was kind of funny. It was dumb, but you got to make light of what you got. So I don't know. I totally forgot about that till you mentioned guard tower duty. But so talking about servant leadership and the character, you go into talking about character, and you talk about ethical behavior and a concern for subordinates. Why are those two so important? That ethical behavior and the concern for subordinates.
Well, you know the old saying, your character is who you are when no one's looking. Your soldiers are always looking. So servant leadership is rooted in those two things, because if you aren't demonstrating ethical behavior, everything you tell your soldiers is going to go out the window. So it goes back to words and deeds, which I think we'll talk about later. But doing the hard right over the easy wrong, making your actions represent the ethics that you're telling your soldiers to emulate. And then concern for subordinates is self-explanatory. If you put their needs above your own, if you put their needs first, everything else will kind of fall into place. Going back to the analogy of shoveling shit, there's times as a leader and there's times as a soldier where you're going to come back and get told, hey, you got to shovel shit. But you have to know and trust that that leader that's coming and telling you that has already fought that battle at echelons above. So if they come and tell you, hey, we got to shovel this, they fought for you. So it's that concern for subordinates is, if you're not willing to lose your rank in defense of your subordinates, you shouldn't be wearing it in the first place, because your rank exists for them, not for you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm reminded of ADP, I think it's 1-0. I taught a class on, and I used that as a reference in an NCODP class back when I was first sergeant. And there is a model talking about the Army profession, and leadership's tied into it. But the bedrock of that model, if you were to look at the old column buildings, but the bedrock of it was trust. And if you don't have trust, you don't have any of the other pillars. You don't have the capstone. Everything's built on trust. And just like you said, if you don't emulate what you're preaching, and you don't have that ethical behavior that you're demanding of your soldiers, you don't have trust. And then if you don't care for them, they're not going to trust you either. But yeah, so.
And it feeds right into mission command. It's based on, mutual trust and a shared understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. Our the last promotion board I sat on, which would have been coming on a year ago, our chief of staff, Colonel Finneran, came in, and we had he was talking with us, and and he was charging the board with, we need to do this and this so we have the best leaders, blah blah blah. That part's irrelevant, but he gave an example which I think really highlights some of the things you talked about. Here we talk about trust, we talk about caring for subordinates, but what you were talking about earlier of delegating tasks, we are smarter than I. And he gave the example of that Russian column that was pushing into Ukraine. For some reason, it was on the side of the road for, I don't remember how long. And he said, we are not going to be like that, because we practice mission command. We trust our subordinates, and we delegate tasks, and trust that they get done and give them the proper authority to do that. And that just always really stuck out to me, over this last, it's probably been 9-10 months now. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly right. We need to trust our leaders, trust ourselves, or not ourselves, but our teams. And that's what really separates us from the other militaries out there.
Great.
So part of that class, again, moves into 10 principles of servant leadership. And I'd like to just go through each one, kind of highlight them. And we got empathy, healing, awareness, conceptualization, foresight, persuasion, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, building community, ethical behavior towards subordinates, and emotional intelligence. So starting off at the top, empathy. What is it? Why is it important?
So empathy is being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I'm a first sergeant, you're a CSM. We were both E4s and privates once. But I think a lot of leaders, when they get up to this echelon, forget that. And we have the benefit of, years of experience at life, at military, at problem solving, all this stuff that a lot of our younger folks maybe don't have. So while we may look at, you were 10 minutes late to formation, you're a freaking adult, be on time. Well, you see, first time what happened was, I don't want to hear it. Counsel. Like, what care and concern are you showing for their subordinate? Now, if you listen to them and let them explain what was going on, well, you see, I set my alarm at this time. I did this, I did that. This is where I ran into traffic. Okay. Hey, man, I've been there. I've been late. So why don't we work together to come up with a strategy for getting you here on time? Let's walk back through the day. How about try this? Set your alarm. You know you have problems getting moving in the morning. I know I do. So I wake up 30 minutes earlier than I think I need to. Why don't we try this? It's showing empathy. There's a recent thing on U.S. Army WTF moments. The screenshot. So I guess some E4s or privates, what have you, started throwing onions down the staircase. I don't know if you saw this one.
Oh, I did it.
I don't know where they got onions in the barracks, but as a result, the CSM put the entire battalion on lockdown, and nobody was going to go home until everything was cleaned up. It ended up just being punitive. And I thought to myself, that CSM just really missed an opportunity to be a servant leader and show empathy. And I actually made a comment. I was like, well, I wish I was the CSM. I would have showed up, personally cleaned up the onions, and then stood at the door as everybody was leaving for the day saying, hey, I was at E4 once. Guys, can we try and cut down on the throwing onions in the building? How's your family?
Pick something
You doing
cleaner.
good?
Yeah.
It's by taking that opportunity to demonstrate that leading by example and just clean. You're a CSM, you don't have to clean anything up. Does it mean you can't? Think of the respect and gratitude and the relationship and goodwill that CSM could have established with that entire battalion by taking that move. Instead of demanding that everything be cleaned up, showing up and helping clean it up himself.
Yeah, and there are many ways of approaching those problems. And yeah, I mean, and that one's an example. Yeah, it needs to get cleaned up. You have to tell them to clean it up, but you're right, like just jump right on in there. Or
maybe if you did that, maybe the next time Private Snuffy gets a bright idea to do something stupid like that, he goes, no, last time the Sergeant Major cleaned this stuff up, I'm going to do the right thing. Not saying that's going to be the outcome, because I know soldiers, but it goes back to that soldiers doing the right thing because they believe in the environment that you've created and the way you treat them, versus not doing something out of fear of getting punished. I think it's a very clear distinction.
Yeah.
So that kind of empathy is putting yourself in your soldier's shoes.
Next one's healing. How does that fit in as a servant leader?
And so, like I said in the presentation, a lot of these can seem like soldiers look at them and go, what is this new age hippy dippy BS? But everything, and I try to put it into real concepts. So healing, right? There's two avenues to it: being able to heal others, but first being able to heal yourself. I alluded to it that I started the deployment with a lot of personal stuff going on at home. How effective as a leader could I have been if I didn't have the ability to maybe not heal myself in the long term, but heal myself in the short term enough to where I was able to focus on the job and my soldiers? So we all experience stuff outside of the office that if you are not able to process and heal that before you show up the next day, and then you take that out on your soldiers, that's not fair to your soldiers.
Yeah.
Likewise, you look at the backgrounds we get soldiers from, the diverse backgrounds. Not everybody had the same upbringing as you. A lot of soldiers come from broken homes. They didn't have a positive male role model. They didn't have a father figure. They grew up in a gang environment, emotional abuse. There's any myriad of things, and then they come into your organization bringing all of that with them. And our goal is to help our soldiers to be better than we ever were. So being able to use that empathy, establish that connection, understand where they're coming from, and help them heal from those past experiences to become a better person. So that's kind of the two avenues of that healing. So by healing those two things, by healing yourself before you bring stuff into the organization, and showing empathy and being able to help the members of your organization heal from things that they bring to the organization, you're overall healing and improving the organization.
Conceptualization, big word. I could barely pronounce it. How does that fit in?
So, and that kind of gets into, okay, surprise, you're going to be a first sergeant in 15 days. All right, what do I want to do? So being able to take a look at the situation, the task, the surrounding factors, everything like that, and come up with a coherent plan, an inspiring vision, and where are we going to go with this? Being able to conceptualize what you want the end state to be, and also a plan for how you think we should get there and how to communicate it, and then how to incorporate the feedback of others. So it's really just creating that concept in your head, not just for the 50-meter target, but you're looking out to the next engagement area, and then backwards planning from there.
Yeah. So this little short conversation reminds me of what you were talking about, and down in Kenya, why are you in this tower when you're an engineer? What's the purpose? And you're tying into that bigger purpose. And it also reminds me of the leadership manuals, as you provide purpose and vision, because the manuals break it up into two. And that vision is that long term, being able to conceptualize, how does my job fit into that bigger picture? So next one's foresight.
Yep. So that kind of it dovetails into conceptualization. It's kind of looking at the second and third order effects. Instead of waiting for an issue or a problem to smack you in the face, you're thinking forward. So in that concept, all right, if we do this, what is that going to have an effect on this? What effect is going to have on this? What are the potential problems? What are solutions I can come up with to mitigate that? So it's just looking forward. So in every decision you make as a leader, it's going to make some people happy. It's going to make some people mad. Foresight is knowing which people are going to be happy, which people are going to be mad, and then how to coalesce both of those into a coherent operational plan for the organization.
Yeah. It's very important, and it definitely takes skill to do that, and experience, because persuasion. What do you mean by persuasion how does that fit in?
Persuasion, it's closely tied to influence. So if I have an idea, hey, I think the organization should do this, I can do one or two things. I'm not the leader of the organization, the commander is, but I can say, we're going to do this, and they're going to have to do it. But by applying persuasion, if I can't persuade people that this is the right direction for the organization, or the right decision, or the right course of action, using logic, facts, and a shared understanding, then maybe it isn't the best course of action for the organization, and I need to go back to the drawing board. Utilizing persuasion helps keep you from operating in a vacuum. If you come out of that first sergeant or CSM or platoon sergeant office and say, this is the way we're going to do things, Okay. But if you come out of there and say, hey, I've got an idea about how we're going to do this. Let me lay it out for you. Maybe you don't do that in front of everybody, but you pull the squad leaders in. Or as the first sergeant, you pull the platoon sergeants in. Hey, here's my thought. Here's why I believe this, because this, here's the boom. And then you go, I like it. That makes sense. So now your subordinates are owning that decision because you have persuaded them using logic and influence. So when they go back to their formation, they're going to say, well, we're doing this because first sergeant said. They're going to go, hey, here's what we're doing because X, Y, and Z. And they're going to apply that same persuasion to that next level down until it permeates down to the lowest levels. So now everybody knows what's going on and everybody understands the why of it because it makes sense. And if you're not able to
back to what you're talking
perhaps
about.
it's not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And it definitely goes back to what you're talking about, compliance and commitment, being able to use persuasion, other leadership skills similar to that really gets that buy-in and gets the compliance, and they're not just doing what you're saying. So we just wrapped up persuasion. The next one's stewardship.
Yeah. Stewardship. We always talk about being stewards of the profession. It's, part of what we do. It's holding something in care for another. So kind of talking about what I received when I first joined the Guard to pretty much save my life. I have to be a good steward of that. Right? I have to take it. Well, I received it. So I have to take what I received, carry it, refine it, and give that back to others. So stewardship is taking all those good things, those benefits we get, those things we learn from good leaders, those things we learn from bad leaders, the trust our subordinates place in us, all of that comes with being a leader, and maintain it and ensure we pass it on to those that are coming behind us. Like I mentioned before, the ultimate goal for me, for you, for any leaders, we want our subordinates to be better than we ever were. So that stewardship is being a good caretaker of that and ensuring we refine it and pass it along.
Exactly. Because initially when you think of stewardship, you think of property accountability, taking care of, resources, the financial resources that you have. But in servant leadership, you're really changing that focus to, yes, that stuff's important, but my people are more important and I need to take care of them.
Well, if you don't have the people, all of that stuff is meaningless. And if you don't have properly prepared and properly cared for people, they're not going to be good stewards of those things. If you put your people first, everything else falls into place.
Yeah. And that leads right into the next bullet comment, or the next topic is commitment to the growth of people.
And that one's kind of at the core of servant leadership. Somebody can come into your organization and just be there. They can come in, do their job, do what they're told, and then leave. Did they grow as a person? Did the organization grow as a result of the things they brought to the table? Did you grow as a leader from your interactions with them? So at the core of that servant leadership in working to support others and putting your trust in them and establishing that relationship, they feel the emotional and intellectual security that they feel that, hey, my opinions are valued. And they feel that they have the opportunity to grow and contribute. Kind of the best example I can give is the commitment to the growth of people is, well, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. One of the things I was thinking of when you mentioned that was, the commitment to, having people be committed to share is I've been listening to a podcast on emotional intelligence and how that develops teams. And this one episode was talking about how, that self-awareness, that social awareness of the team. And, this leadership coach was hired by this leader who was a follow me, we're hard charging, we're going to do great things, I care about my people, but here's the high standard that we're all going to meet. And he failed to have that commitment to the growth of people, that I don't want to say he didn't have servant leadership, because that might be a little harsh, because I don't know much about the situation, but he didn't focus on the people. And what they found in that team was, when they were having meetings, that when certain people talked, that's when other people grab their phones, like, oh, they're not the leader, he's not important, I'm going to listen to this, subliminally. Not, they wouldn't say that, they didn't believe that maybe, but that's the way it was. So as a leader, oh, and then the other example was, that leader, he cared about his people, or he said he did, but it was somebody's birthday and it wasn't recognized in the group. And this was a small team. It was, I believe it was some sort of pharmaceutical company, if I remember correctly. And that coach pulled that leader aside. He's like, hey, did you know it was so-and-so's birthday? He was like, well, yeah, I knew it was. Well, you never told him happy birthday. And he was like, oh, I didn't. It's just that dedication, that commitment to that growth of people, to your individuals in building that team. That just reminded me of what you said. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like if you're farming, right? You have to invest in the seed that's planted in order for it to bear fruit. So when you're committed to the growth of people, you're establishing that relationship, you're giving them the intent, the why, you're having conversations with them, you're understanding what it is they bring to the table and what their passions are and what they want to do, and you're empowering them to bring that to the organization so they can grow personally, professionally, while improving the organization.
Yeah, exactly. And on a side note, I'm glad that you dropped the farming card, being the Green Mountain State, dropping it for us corn huskers here. I thought that was kind of, I mean, I know you didn't mean to do it, but I thought it was kind of funny. So the next one's building community. How does that fit into servant leadership?
It goes back to, the same thing with influence and everything we're talking about. When you're in the Army, the focus is on culture. How many times I hear, we're all a family here, we're a team. Okay, you say that, but what are you doing to make people feel that? So building that sense of community. So one of the things here, we are generally not a diverse state. So if somebody walks in from a different background than 95% of the other people in the unit, are they a part of the community you've built? Have you truly built a sense of community where everybody feels welcome? Is that community and that culture one of inclusiveness that welcomes people in? And it goes back to providing that purpose and direction. Is everybody united around a vision you have communicated, all working towards the same thing because they are committed to the organization and bought into what you've communicated? So when you've effectively built that sense of community, people aren't just showing up to drill because they have to. They're showing up to drill because they want to, because they feel like they are a part of that environment and that community in the organization.
Yeah, exactly. And as I really, and I know what you meant by community, by building that team. But one of the things that I think about when I think about building community is the greater community of your soldiers and their families. And really focusing, as a senior leader, kind of like what I mentioned earlier about getting back to that organizational leadership, is building a good, strong family readiness group. And, when I was the first sergeant of our HHC for our battalion, my wife was assisting in that. And then while we were deployed, she ended up taking over the duties. But in order to have a good FRG on deployment, you have to take the time before, because the time to develop an FRG is not a month before you deploy. It's just like the training cycle. It's year one. It's reset year. That's when you start building those connections. So not to take away from what you said as a part of building the community within the organization, but I think that's important as well. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. And also, especially in the Guard, building that sense of community with the area in which your unit resides. You know, the local, are you supporting the local parades, the events? Are you getting out in the community? Here we have Green Up Day every year in the spring, where everybody across the state goes out, picks up trash, puts it in the green bags. The refuse companies come around and collect it. Like, so it's not just within your organization, it's outside, it's the families, it's that greater sense of belonging. Is it just an organization that shows up in uniform to accomplish this specific task, or does it fit into the overall community in which that organization resides?
Yeah, exactly. We've already touched on this, but it's another bullet point here is ethical behavior.
Yeah, and that the root of all of it. One of a leader's greatest weaknesses is insincerity, and one of a soldier's greatest strengths is spotting it. Yeah. So if your behavior doesn't match the ethical standard you're setting for soldiers, nothing else we're talking about matters. And this is, if there's one area where leaders will fail at, it's this one. And I'm not talking about the egregious ethical, the big things. It's the small things. It's when you're faced with the very small decisions of, I'm freaking beat, I'm hot, especially as a senior leader. I have the opportunity to get out of here and get in the air conditioning for 10 minutes. Can I go? And the Army has a huge thing on ethical decision making. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what's right to do. So going back to that situation, you have the opportunity to make yourself more comfortable than your soldiers for 10 minutes. Nobody's looking. Do you do it? Or do you stop to think, my soldiers aren't in air conditioning. They're out on the range humping packs. And maybe don't, because I guarantee you there's an E4 somewhere that's watching you.
Yeah, exactly. Let me throw this out there. One of the things that came to mind when I was thinking about ethical behavior is that battle between, and it's a mental battle, not a real battle, but the battle between integrity, doing what is right, and loyalty.
That could be a podcast into of itself.
We'll save that for another day.
Yeah. I think the litmus test for that is, what's the right thing for your soldiers?
Yeah.
If I have to bend a rule that could cause my integrity to be questioned by superiors, but I did the right thing for my soldier, I'll sleep like a baby.
And I think, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, well, I definitely agree with you there. So we'll save the greater conversation for another podcast. Behavior towards subordinates.
That's a huge one. One of the things I see all too often in the Army is leaders aren't able to separate the person from the behavior, especially at the junior leadership levels. Like I talked about, when I was a junior enlisted soldier, I was what you could consider a shitbag. Now, if somebody just looked at me and said, "You're a shitbag," that's attacking the person. What can I do with that? Okay, how? What did I do? What can I do to improve? Whereas if you separated the person from the behavior, and I was told, you're consistently late, you show up in a uniform that's not serviceable, and your appearance is not, it doesn't display a military bearing. Okay. So those are behaviors that would constitute what a lot of leaders would categorize as shitbag behaviors. But the key is when you separate from the person from the behavior, you give people the behavior that they can change. All right. So you're consistently late. Here's some strategies we can help you to be on time. Your uniform's not serviceable. Not pressed. I mean, that's going back to the days of BDUs when we had to starch them. But okay, here's some things that, let's take you over to supply. Let's get you some uniforms that are serviceable. Here's what you need to do to make sure your uniform doesn't look like you just took it out of a duffel bag. All right, so getting back to that. I just completely lost my train of thought. I will say for the viewers, I'm service connected for TBI. Yeah, I completely lost my train of thought. Get me back on track.
It's fine. You know, we were talking about behavior towards subordinates and really, you know what, well, we can just move on. That's fine.
But behavior, I want to give you an example of behavior towards subordinates that goes back to incorporating healing. So I had a soldier that I had a really great relationship with. Awesome soldier, encountered some struggles in his personal life, put on a lot of weight. I had a bad day. I was stressed out coming off the range, and I made comments to him in front of his peers about him being a fat body. So the years I had spent developing that relationship and that trust, I shattered in an instant because of improper behavior towards a subordinate. So was I treating my subordinate in an ethical manner consistent with servant leadership? No. Now, where the healing comes into that is his squad leader came up to me later that day and said, hey, you really did a number on so-and-so. Really upset, etc. So I was a platoon sergeant at that point. Could have done one or two things. Said, well, fuck him, he shouldn't be fat. But I recognized that I had damaged that relationship and I engaged in some healing. So as the E7, I went and sat down with the E4 and I apologized to him. Said, you know what? I was out of line. I should not have made those comments to you, especially in front of your peers. I sincerely apologize, and I hope we can work to move past it. And now that I'm back as his first sergeant, we have. But it goes back to that thing of it takes years to develop that trust and only seconds to break it. So that's where that healing and that treatment of subordinates comes in.
The last one is emotional intelligence, which again, I'm listening to a podcast series on it, so it could be its own episode or again, like, you know, series. But what is emotional intelligence? How does it tie into servant leadership? And what are your thoughts on it?
Well, the story I just relayed is an example of emotional intelligence. It's knowing, hey, I was in the wrong. I let my emotions get the best of me. It goes back to that self-knowledge and self-reflection of, hey, I'm a human being. I have, you know, my own thoughts and feelings. Life happens. Things get all thrown in the mix. And knowing how to regulate your emotions to fit the situation. Like instead of if something happens that pisses you off and you feel yourself getting to the point where you just want to go out and scream at everybody. Maybe take a second to have the emotional intelligence to realize that you're just a little bit riled up, and that's probably not the best course of action. Take a pause, address it another day.
Yeah, so with this class that you taught in Africa, and that the timing of it all is I took an online course. It was a management level course for law enforcement, and the first 4 weeks were on leadership. And one of the books that we had to read, and really the book is about emotional intelligence. It's Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and I'll share the information, outside of the podcast. But what it is you take an emotional intelligence quiz, and then it directs you to different parts of the book. And then the various parts of the book are different tips on how to improve that category of your emotional intelligence. So, like what you were saying, in your example, self-awareness, are you able to identify how you are coming off to others, or what you are feeling? And then the last thing that you had mentioned is taking a pause, taking a break, ties into self-management. Are you able to manage those emotions? Like, emotions are part of being a human. So are you able to identify them? Self-awareness. Are you able to manage them? Put them on pause, conceptualize why you're feeling it. And then, the other two, social awareness, social skills, are being able to understand how you come across to others, and then how you interact with others. So I think, emotional intelligence is vital, when it comes to servant leadership. The last part of your class ended with a discussion about words and deeds. Why is this so important for leaders to consider in developing their leadership style?
Well, it goes back to what we've been talking about. Your soldiers are always watching. There's the if well, like I talked about in the class, there's the 3 U's concept. There's the you think you are, there's the you other people see you as, and then there's who you actually are. The goal is to have all 3 of those line up as close as possible. So if what you're telling people and the things you're talking about don't line up with your actions, nothing you say matters. You can come in and give the greatest servant leadership class. You can come in and you can check off leadership doctrine out of 6-22, Army leadership in the profession, word for word. But if you don't practice it, it doesn't matter. And this is an area that I think all leaders struggle with. I know I struggle with it. I fail at it. And if you remember, when I opened the class, I said, this is not me preaching at you. All the things I talk about, I have failed continually in this throughout my career, and I still do every day. But going back to that self-awareness and emotional intelligence is knowing when you fail and being able to realize it and analyze that and use that to be better the next time around. So yeah, it ties all back to that.
I think it was slide 2. I'm actually looking at it on my screen right now. It's the image of, and I loved this cartoon when I was growing up, because I was a 80s 90s kid. Is the turtles and Splinter, and you got Splinter walking with the baby turtles as a staff sergeant. They're all E1 to E4, and then your leadership, it says your leadership ripples throughout lifetimes. Always coach, teach, and mentor your subordinates. And then the bottom image is all the turtles grown up. You got the master sergeant, the first sergeant, another first sergeant, an E7, and you got that CSM who's either already retired or close to it, walking with him still. So it definitely encompasses that, all of the elements that you talked about. of caring for your subordinates, developing a positive team, providing them foresight, and helping provide that guidance, and then just the practical applicability of just now they're in charge to new generation, carrying on the traditions of the service.
Well, in all of these concepts, it ties into, we talk a lot about culture in the Army, the unit culture, the organizational culture. We have command culture and climate. So you're familiar with the Pope glass on turrets, right?
Yep.
So when we first went into Iraq, Afghanistan and Iraq, we just had the turrets. They stopped about here. So do you know how the Pope glass came about? With a ballistic glass up around the turrets that have saved, I don't know how many lives.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can only assume it's because of a E4 below that had to sit in a turret and thought about a better way of protecting themselves, and they shared that idea.
Was a National Guard E4 who was a welder on the civilian side. So the enemy changed their TTPs, started putting IEDs in trees and up on walls, so it was coming down on top of gunners. He was sick of seeing his buddies come in shredded up. So he started just fabricating the brackets, found some ballistic glass in the junkyard, started welding this up, welded it up on his company's trucks. Patrol comes back in, Pope glass all pockmarked, shredded up, drove past a 1-star. 1-star looked at it and goes, well, I'll be damned. Runs back to the dock, tells a 2-star, 2-star calls 3-star. Meanwhile, that gets patented and spread all across everything, and now that became the standard. But what I took away from that story is, what was it about the environment and the culture in that unit where that E4 felt empowered to have an idea and just do it? That's what servant leadership is striving for. You're creating an environment where you've shifted the control and the decision-making power to where the information is. Do you think the first sergeant saw all that and came up with that great idea? No, it's the people at where the rubber meets the road. So if you've created the environment where your people know that their ideas and their input is valued, and they feel like they are a part of the organization, they understand the intent and the purpose, they will amaze you. So that's what we're striving for with it. If you create that environment where people have the personal ownership and the intellectual security to think of better ways to do things and improve the organization, knowing that their ideas will be respected and supported, they have personal ownership over the direction of the organization. So now, instead of having 99 people just doing what they're told, you have 99 people that understand what you're trying to do, that are thinking, feeling, with ideas, with input and care. And they'll give you 150% of their effort to achieve those organizational goals and actually improve the goals and move the goalposts, because they have a better perspective than we do, because we sit in the office doing paperwork.
So true. So at the beginning of this, I brought up a question that I wanted to ask you, and now is a great time to ask it before we wrap up. Is we talk about servant leadership, we talk about developing our junior leaders, and as a direct level leader, team leader, squad leader, platoon sergeant, definitely a first sergeant, but that's where things try to separate. But how does the organizational leader, somebody who is on a staff, doesn't matter what your rank is, you could be a junior officer, senior NCO, but you're still that organizational level leader where you don't have direct contact with the companies or the detachments below. How do you develop that atmosphere to build servant leaders?
Well, influence doesn't require a physical proximity. you can pick up a phone, you can send an email, you can uh there's any number of ways where you can do that without having that physical proximity. Like in your case, you're a CSM, but your people are spread all far throughout. Simple things like just like we are now with Zoom call, getting the leaders together in the classroom for just the 30 minutes. Hey, how are you guys all doing? What are the issues? What do you got going on? What can I help with? And just approaching the conversation from there. And influence, especially on staffs. Like I had the opportunity to be a battalion operations NCO as an E7. And it was an interesting opportunity because coming off of the line, I was like, well, all right, what am I doing here? But we just moved into doing a in-depth externally guided MDMP exercise. And so I was able to use my experience and my influence to influence the battalion planning process. Hey, maybe this isn't a good idea. Hey, I noticed you're doing this. And it's, even if you're not a direct level leader, that same relationship building and that same influence process occurs. If you're in that staff role, it relies on interoperability. So establishing those relationships with your counterparts in the different sections, understanding the different personality dynamics between the different staff officers and how they interact. There's any number of things you can do to extend that influence and build the organization.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate those insights. So I sent, when I emailed you that outline, I was really concerned that this was going to turn into a 5-10 minute conversation, and we're sitting here, yeah, yeah, and now we're pushing, or we're at an hour and a half. So I just definitely appreciate your time. So
what we probably spent, I don't know, 200 hours talking about this stuff over the last deployment.
Oh, if not more, and with other great, exceptional senior leaders in all the services. That was probably my biggest takeaway from Africa, was being having to coordinate with all the services. It was a joint base, a joint environment. And then the other takeaway was the benefit of the mess. And I think, my buddy's going to give me a hard time because I give him a hard time about being a retired Navy, but the Navy does a really good job of the mess and the mess culture, and the interconnectedness of all the senior NCOs. And that's something that I definitely want to try and instill in the battalion, and then just in the Army as well, is knowing your other senior NCOs, building those relationships, knowing who is responsible for what, and reaching out. Oh, that's the problem. Oh, I know who to talk to. And that I definitely took that away. I always knew it was important, but I definitely took that away on this last mobilization.
Agreed.
So, all right. So I introduced you as a lot of things, and two things that I did introduce you as is as an author and as an entrepreneur. And on my I Love Me wall, I have a book, Awesome Shit My Drill Sergeant Said, by Dan Caddy. So if you haven't read this book, you don't have it. It's a great book. It's funny. Just open it up, read some shit. How did you end up being an author?
So I started the Facebook page just kind of as a tribute for Shits and Grins back in 2012. It rapidly took off into just kind of a central place for all things, basic training stories, drill sergeant one-liners, insults, and it was kind of a homage to these individuals that play such a crucial part in all of our lives. They have 9 short weeks to turn us from ne'er-do-wells of all types into a cohesive and functioning person. And so while, the humor and the insults, all that's good, but then, reflecting back on the impact that they had on our lives kind of gave rise to this. Ended up transitioning into an apparel brand. I got reached out to by HarperCollins publishers that said, hey, you know, all these things you're sharing would make a really good book. And it kind of went from there.
Awesome. So you mentioned a website, or not a website, a Facebook page where you sell apparel. What's that Facebook group?
Yeah. So it's facebook.com/ASMDSS. And then the website is ASMDSS.com. All types of fun stuff. You can see one of my favorite shirts as a first sergeant. I do indeed cause safety briefs and all types of fun stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I know there's a sweatshirt that I'm gonna buy. I just recently saw it. It was the one with it was that camo pattern, or not camo pattern, it's kind of in the woods, and it was like a picture of Dick Cheney with a shotgun in the background. Yeah, so yeah, you'll see that order come through here in a week or two as soon as I have a break from my wife overseeing my purchases. So
I figured you'd go for the not a cop.
that's a little bit too straightforward, but that would be another good one too. So, but
I'm
hey,
jealous
Dan,
of your video quality. I got to get a better webcam.
yeah, so I appreciate your time. It was great seeing you again. I haven't seen you. I mean, I know we're not in person, but I haven't seen you since the deployment. I know we've texted and messaged a few times, so it was great seeing you. I am scheduled to graduate from Southern New Hampshire next April. So I don't know if I'm going to walk in April, November, but either way, I will definitely, get a hold of you and we can hang out, have a beer, have some whiskey or something, whenever that. So, all right. Well, take care. Great talking to you. And I'll send you the link to this when this is done.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Bye. Well, if you made it this far in the episode, you listened to the entire thing. So I'm glad that you stuck around. Dan's, like I said, he's a great friend of mine. He's a really good leader, and it was great talking to him. I haven't actually seen him in person since deployment, but it was really good to see him. I do have a lot of exciting topics I really want to talk about in the future, but if there's something that you want to talk about, if you want to hear from me on, reach out to your leadership, push it up the chain of command, or reach out to me directly, and I'll see if I can find somebody to talk to and talk about the topic that you're interested in. Otherwise, until the next episode, continue taking care of your soldiers, practice servant leadership,